So introductions first, and then our ideas on some of the priorities and issues. So I first got involved with Access. My first Access was 2008 when it was in Hamilton. I had heard about Access before and thought it was really scary and above where I could possibly ever hope to be. And I attended my first one and absolutely loved it. And I've been going to all the ones I could after that. I think I missed Charlottetown, which was a shame. But after that, I've been, I think, to every single one for the most part. So I was chair when it was in St. John's, which I never remember the year because it was all kind of a blur. I think it was 2013. But yeah, so that's where I'm coming from.
Hi, I'm Merle Steeves. I'm the head of technical services here at UNB, and I started attending Access conferences back in it was 2002 in Windsor, and I think I've only missed about 3 since then. So I've hit quite a few of them. My line of work, I'm kind of sort of in the in between systems and the cataloging department and acquisitions. So I kind of work at that interface, and I do find there's a lot of discussions that happen at Access that are really helpful, sort of understanding how systems work and just getting new ideas on how we can work together. So I've found it a very useful conference. It's kind of been my go-to conference for every year, and I've just gotten to know a lot of people here at the conference. So it's a good way to. There's a lot of contacts. So when we run into issues at the library, I can reach out to people at other institutions and say, hey, how are you handling this particular issue? So I find that very useful.
I think pretty similar to the other 2 experiences. I can't remember the year. My first one was in Halifax. And then I've had some gaps here and there, but I've pretty consistently tried to get there, tried to get to Access if it's any sort of reasonable way to do it. I always described Access as the conference that was so useful for me because I would be never good enough to present at it. So I don't know that I've gotten better, but I do think that Access has morphed a little bit and broadened a little bit in scope, and sort of has moved a little bit away from sort of the hard coding and into more sort of general areas of library tech, which I think is actually reflected in our institutions as well. There's complexity, there's more integration. But again, we have the proposals we have, and so it's been really good that way, even if I'm speaking way too much now. So my major reason for being up here right now was that I was, along with Ali, who is here, and Kim, who is not, co-chair of last year's conference in Toronto. So I did the finances for that and have some relatively strong opinions on that area. Okay. So what was unique about Toronto was that it was a city bid, not like a university bid. And I sort of brought myself onto that because of my position within my university. There really isn't any other way to do the finances unless you're part of a university. Public libraries have a lot of trouble doing the kind of, they don't have the flex we have to get the money we need and move the money around. And outside of any sort of institution, it's impossible to host, I would say. And even then, in talking to Krista and talking to the Calgary people, all universities have different approaches to money, how you can spend it, when you can spend it, what you can spend it on. And it was a real challenge, certainly at Ryerson, to do a lot of this work. They don't host a lot of conferences, and there was some big limitations around something as simple as alcohol. Alcohol shouldn't be that simple, but what are the rules around that? I ended up paying a significant amount of expenses off my credit card because it was easier, and really that's a bad, terrible idea. It's just phenomenally dumb, but it was what needed to happen to get it done. And I think that where I'm coming from in terms of oversight over the conference. I think I'm kind of on the Code for Lib side where there needs to be some stronger financial oversight. I think that the conference itself has a strong enough culture that I don't know that we need to have sort of an oversight that way, but in terms of the finances, I do think we need to find a way to, whether it's incorporate as a nonprofit, whether it's having a standing financial host, something that we need to explore in order to try to figure out how to make that transition a little easier, and to ensure that we're not putting individuals personally responsible for the financial running of the conference if something terrible happens.
I guess I'm on this year's planning committee, and we had, I don't know, I think every institution works a bit differently. Our experience on the financial side went a lot more smoothly, I think, and I don't really know why that is. It's just the rules in our institution maybe are a little more flexible about how these things can be set up, and we've hosted WILU, the Library Instruction Conference, recently, which is a very similar conference in terms of size and organization, or lack of. There's no real organizing body. It's just kind of handed off from year to year. So we had experience with that, and that seemed to really put us in a good place to host this year's conference. I guess another area that I think that we could look at, and sort of just maybe giving future hosts some help with is maybe some documentation, or at least some guidelines or principles around what we would like to see at each conference, or I mean, we're kind of just going on like Jeff said, just based on past practice. So, but it's pretty open to make a lot of changes with the format, and I don't think we want it to be strict or anything, but I think it's good to have some documentation that can give you some assistance in saying here's what we normally would do, and here's what we kind of agreed on doing each year.
So I had two areas which kind of break down into three total. I agree with Gillian that finances are probably our biggest concern. There is money that passes between the conferences. I think we need to keep an oversight of that, make sure that there is some seed money for the next conference, so that it isn't all just based on registrations. A little bit of context, and I don't know the entire history, but it's my understanding that we're over 20 years old, but at some point in time, the Emerging Technologies Interest Group was kind of overseeing this conference, which was under the auspices of CLA. So we had an association that if something happened, an institution wouldn't be picking up a $10,000 bill if something went wrong with the hotel, or they canceled last minute, or you ordered food wrong, or something like that. We're missing that kind of that person standing at our back to kind of make sure that if something does go wrong, it isn't falling on a specific institution or a group of people. So I think it's really important that we take a look at what options are out there and what's going to be the best fit for this community. From that, I think a subcommittee looking at some better ways to support our community through scholarships and bursaries would be a good idea. We've had a couple come up. We've seen one that lasted only a year that we could look at reviving. We've got a diversity scholarship. We can look at all sorts of different new things, like do we have particular groups targeted, or do we have a new student or a first timer, or what kind of things do we want to do? And if we do want to find more ways to support our community in attending what I think is hands down one of the best conferences, we need to be able to find a way to support that financially as well. So I think that all kind of ties together. And I think what Merle was saying about a handbook, can also be useful. Now, unfortunately, it usually falls to previous chairs to write those. But we do, I think, need to take the time to say, here are some guidelines on things like you need to contact sponsors by this date. Otherwise, their money's gone, and you're not going to get the numbers that you want. Here are some templates for writing those sponsorship letters. Here are some things to think about in terms of the types of committees you should probably consider getting, and how many, what's a good number, things like this. Just some guidelines written down to make it easier, because we are seeing that we're not getting as many institutions stepping forward to offer to host. And I don't know if it's because people are afraid and they don't have that documentation. I don't know if it's the finances that institutions aren't willing to support, that they think that they're going to be taking on a burden, if people are just too busy. But I think this is too good of a conference to say we're just too busy. So I'd like to see some solutions, and I don't have them. I'm really hoping we can get some discussion out of this today. But those are kind of my general thoughts right now.
One thing I would just add to Krista's comment is, when you're done, as in this afternoon, you're not going to want to touch this for a while. So that's kind of the problem often with the documentation too. We had this discussion last year, and I'm like, yeah, we're going to form a committee, we're going to do this, and we're going to figure it out for next year. And then I was like, I can't even think about access for a very long time. So I think part of the idea of having some of that stuff developed outside of not just on the backs of whoever's organizing it that year, helps to distribute some of that effort, because it's exhausting, it's really stressful, you pull it all together, and then you kind of want to just pay the bills and leave it alone for a while. So I think that there is something that, if we were to have a group sort of about documentation, we could get together some former hosts, and not just sort of make it one committee's, the organizing committee's responsibility.
Okay, I'm going to grab the mic, and then we're going to open it to any comments. And feel free to comment on anything from the Hackfest. It's a good chance to get some feedback. I know we're going to send around a survey to get your feedback on this conference in general, but I think some of these things extend beyond, is the format of the Hackfest still appropriate? Does it need to change to get more involvement, or, the program, that sort of thing. So I'll grab the mic. I'm waiting for the hands.
Thank you. I do have a little history with this group, or with this conference. And it was interesting looking in the conference website and seeing that the first conference was held in 1973 in Winnipeg. And I attended that conference. It was a conference on the cereals crisis, hosted by, it was hosted by Carolyn Presser, the director of the University of Manitoba Library at that time. And 1974, Slavko Mihaljevic at Memorial, and he was very involved with Z39.50, and it was a Z39.50 conference. In 1995, basically, we were very interested in electronic publishing and what that would mean. And so we put together a conference called Access 95, and basically we had representatives coming in from Elsevier, from the American Chemical Society, but our keynote that year was David Seaman from the University of Virginia. And so our tech center actually took quite a bit of form that looked a lot like Virginia's in terms of David was very helpful in a lot of ways. But it was something that we were interested in as an institution, why we organized that conference, specifically to be able to learn from the community about something that we wanted to do. At that conference, I was asked by at least one other director, well, how did you get this conference? Well, we just decided we wanted to learn something, so we put together the conference and hosted it. And basically because I was the director of the libraries and I could take on the responsibility of what is that financial obligation. We certainly didn't want to lose money, we didn't. But we didn't want to really make money either. It was just a matter of how do we cover cost. And so actually it was the director from University of Calgary that, ooh, I want to host this. And, but actually Vancouver beat him to the punch, and they hosted the next year, then Calgary. And so this actually grew out of basically people wanting to learn about different things. And it wasn't an organized effort, and that's a real strength. I mean, CLA, boy, I wouldn't want them supporting my conference right now. And I've been president of that association. I think the strength of the conference comes from the participation and the activity that you've been doing. How you'd write that manual, but you really are going to have, you're an associate director, and it's going to be at that level or above that has to sort of backstop this kind of conference. I don't know how much money is being passed from one conference to the next, and certainly at the time when we did it back in '95, there didn't exist. And so Linda, wherever you are, very interesting in seeing the sponsorships, because that was something that I'm pretty sure I did not do any sponsorships or try to do that year back in '95. I've certainly done it since for other conferences that we wanted to run, and we've run a number of ad hoc conferences at UNB on topics that we just wanted to learn something about that were interesting to the community in terms of the wider library community. And so those are actually turn out pretty well. The more organization you put on it, what is that service debt or that you're going to be building up? So careful on that side, but you really do need some institutions who are willing to take something on. And if people are not willing to step forward, that's a sad sign. But anyway, because this is, I think people learn a lot in this community, and this is really worthwhile.
I think I would just parse one thing there, is that if people aren't willing, it's one thing. If they're not able, that's what I'd really like to figure out and explore. Like, what are the barriers beyond workload and everything else? I know, Krista.
One of the things I think that's happening right now, Code for Lib, which has kind of, as far as I understand, kind of came out of Access. The US wanted something similar to what we had up here. Are going through similar questions at this point in time, and I believe they've got a task force set up to look at financial. I'm not sure what else they're looking at.
I'm actually on that in a very limited way, simply because of my interest in Access. It's the financial extingency interest group. I cannot say that word, so I just ignore it. But it is looking, it's basically a three-pronged approach. They're basically looking at three potential solutions. One is having the financial oversight by something like LIDA, OLA, or there's another, or ALA, or by sort of a more, any sort of nonprofit that kind of meets the model that can do the financial side of things, so the insurance, the sponsorship, that sort of thing, the financial sponsor of the organization, or if it's worth incorporating. So those are sort of the three things that they're looking at now. It's all, there's a big wiki about it, so it's all being very transparent. But essentially, as I understand it, there's some serious risks that came up that they felt they really needed to solve. I don't know if we're quite there yet, but I do think those are sort of the three areas. If we were to look at doing, again, I'm interested in the finances. If we were interested in moving forward, those would probably be our three possible solutions as well. So
I guess the question I'd like to pose is, do we want to have a task force pulled together to look at this kind of thing and create some recommendations that are presented at a conference next year? And in saying that, knowing that we really need volunteers for that. So I'd like to get a sense from the folks here if that's something they're interested in, if they would be willing to volunteer. You don't have to say right now, but it will have to be like within the next 2 weeks. And what other issues? Are there other issues that you see? A lot of the accessibility, equity things can be drawn out in the handbook. Are there other things that need to be highlighted in this conference? What do you think's missing?
Just a note about the documentation. I've only been involved in organizing one conference, and I can't imagine doing it without the documentation that was provided to me before we started. So I guess I would suggest that if we could provide conference planning documentation that we've worked with in the past as templates and then adapt it to Access, that might be helpful. I can try and dig up the stuff that I used and in a hope that it would be helpful, if that's a good idea. I guess the only other comment I had is from the Ignite talk that Laura did yesterday about code consultation. That to me, it just kind of, it was awesome. And I would love to see that kind of content, I think, at Access. We have a lot of focus on projects and software and applications, but maybe not so much on like the pre-processing aspects. Like, could we do mini tutorials on Linux shell scripting or on OpenRefine or MarkEdit or something like that? I know from a technology point of view, I'm not very capable, but those kinds of things might help build confidence for folks who are trying to become more capable in those areas. So that's something that I just thought was it was quite inspiring, I think, from her talk, and that's all.
I think that's actually what Brian was trying to get at when he was talking about Hackfest.
I'll just add that
turning into a bit of a Learn Fest as well.
I'll just say that last year's organizers left us really great, the documentation that they had. So we did have a lot of assistance in that respect. But I think we could come up with something.
Yeah, it's kind of informal. You kind of just pass on what we did last year or what the last two conferences happened to have, and it varied dramatically by the institution that was sharing.
Well, I think it's no matter how good your documentation is, it was very good that I got, but it wasn't necessarily relevant to what the approach that we had to take. It wasn't even that we had much of a choice, depending on what city you're in and what your infrastructure is. But I think it's in relatively good shape. There's a lot of culture built into it, and that's interesting. So it's Access is always single stream. That's part of our known culture, but we're not documenting that as a fact. It's part of our known culture. So I think there are some things that are interesting assumptions to test, possibly. But yeah, I do think so.
I'll apologize in advance. This sounds like another blast from the past, but I do want to pick up some of the comments that John was making. I was part of the Vancouver group that was involved in the 1996 conference when we pulled them back over to the West Coast. And that was a very spontaneous, and to use a more contemporary term, very agile event. But I think there's things that we can learn from some of those past experiences. That was the first time that we had 3 different universities involved. We actually piggybacked on the Provincial Electronic Library Net Consortium that provided that sort of home for us. And I'd suggest that if you look, in different provinces or areas, there are groups like that that can maybe provide a little bit more of that formal framework or home so they can address your financial issues or just, provide that sort of administrative facility. I'd also suggest that now, if we look, a lot of us are involved in other user groups, whether it's around software projects like Island Dora or Hydra or whatever. And in some respects, those might be another group that one could partner up with and use as a basis to provide some of that administrative support. I'd really caution against getting too formalized or even thinking of going as some sort of nonprofit group. I think that one of the strengths of Access, in a lot of ways, it's been agile. It's always responded to the groups that run it. But at the same time, it's kept really true to some basic conventions in terms of the single stream conference, the themes and everything. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure how much you need to document all of that. I'll comment also, because this is from the perspective of the Public Knowledge Project. We've been running conferences every 2 years, and we keep those pretty light. They don't move around, so we can't afford to do a big expensive thing. In fact, our main planning document is a Google spreadsheet that has 12 months worth of milestones in it. And we just dust that off every 2 years and use it as a basis to run the conference. So I understand the need for a little bit more documentation or anything, but I'm suggesting keep it light and keep it agile, and I think it's probably still going to work for you.
Oh, there's Ally.
Thank you. So kind of building off what some of the other people have said, I'm a very new person to Access, and I actually helped plan last year's conference in Toronto, having never done it before. Actually, 3/4 of our team had never even been to an Access. And so it was really helpful to have all of that documentation and to, I guess, yes, I totally understand what people are saying in terms of being agile, being flexible, keeping with the traditions of the conference. But I also think that there's something to be said for kind of experimenting with things too. Like this year, I know I personally really valued having the Ignite talks. I think that added a lot to the programming. Not sure how often that has happened in the past because, again, I haven't been to previous conferences, but that was something that we didn't do last year, and I feel like it worked out really well. So I think kind of being open to experimenting a little, maybe with some of our even more established things. I think even with the Hackfest, there is a bit of an opportunity there to kind of play around with the format. Last year we did kind of a dual stream type thing where one group had kind of a structured project they were working on, and the other group had more of a kind of similar in scope to this year's programming, where people just kind of did whatever they wanted to do. And I thought that it worked out really well, and it was also really nice for people who were not super technical or maybe don't feel like they belong at something called a Hackfest to have that more structured thing where someone is kind of leading it, so they don't feel like they have to necessarily take a ton of ownership. Just some thoughts.
I think, as Sam just said on the on the Twitters, where's the sweet spot? We want to stay loose, we want to stay agile, but we want to make sure that we can support those putting this conference on, and again, that we're not putting organizers in vulnerable positions while still allowing it to be flexible and suit local needs. So I think that's why Krista's idea of having a task force to explore some of these things would help.
I, too, just have some thoughts, and they're not related to logistics or finances. I have very little to offer. But one of the things that just came out of the discussions just now, coming from a public library, I saw on the Twitter feed a comment, I can't remember who from, about getting more involvement from that side of things, or that sector. And talking to people about how they are not coming from an MLIS background and being exposed to library culture here, quote unquote library culture. Some of the talks that I took the most away from, well, all of them, but some of the ones that I connected with were about programming and cultural perspectives. I think that exploring that content would be a great way to bring in other partners, other funding opportunities, broadening the scope. I don't want to get too far away from the mandate or the mission of this conference, but once you get into documentation, you can look into sort of the code of content, code of conduct, and the social practices, especially that opening keynote of social justice and the role it plays in tech work and that intersection. Exploring that would be an interesting direction to take. A lot of museums are dealing with, and I threw up a comment about this on the Slack just like half an hour ago, but a lot of museums I feel like will be dealing with how to digitally archive really ephemeral content, and I think we've got stuff to offer just from the people talking to the people in this room in that direction. And looking at, how to make the conference more accessible. a lot of podcasts offer translations and transcriptions of audio content. I don't know, maybe someone can say something about whether the live stream acknowledges that in practice, or if that's been addressed in the past, sort of. I don't know. I just have lots of questions being at this conference for the first time. Please provide answers.
Anyone else? We're nearly out of time. I will say, I'm not sure our live stream, I don't think there's any captioning, but these are always issues, and I think I was kind of talking about this before. Each conference is kind of free to do its own thing. There's an expectation that you will live stream the conference, but I don't know if someone was to decide they didn't have the money in the budget to do it, whether it might vanish some year. The conference is live streamed. It stays on the YouTube channel. It gets cut up afterwards. We have to pay an extra fee to have that done. So all these things kind of add up, and I think having them captioned is probably an excellent idea, and we should look into that and kind of build that sort of thing in. But all these things they're one more thing, and then it's, it's nice that there's an ongoing YouTube channel, but it's up to each site to get the live stream up. I think the Calgary live stream is not on the YouTube channel. It was up for a few months, but it wasn't there anymore. So some of these things need kind of ongoing support, I think, to ensure that they keep running.
I'm not seeing it in the room, but I'm seeing a lot of volunteers on Twitter. So I'm going to just say thanks right now, because I'm going to be bugging you all. I got nothing else right now.
It sounds like there's a general will. I think what we need to do is scope out our expectations. Because everybody loves access, everybody's going to put their hand up, but we should make it a reasonable ask for people to contribute. What is it that we're trying to do? And I know that you talked a little bit about the beginning, but do you think you could frame that in we want to have a task force to do X? To put you right on the spot.
Jeez, I wasn't expecting to take a lead. I think we can. My original thought was to kind of get some ideas from folks, and if there seemed to be interest, and I'm getting a sense that there is some interest to kind of consider what we're doing. I'm going to we'd like to get everybody who's not in the room or on the Twitter feed right now a chance to let us know what you think the priorities should be. Send out what we think priorities are currently, give you your chance, have a couple weeks of feedback, and then have a couple weeks to get volunteers. And in that time, we can, I think it has to be maybe the three of us together work on what that scope/mandate is. And then once we've got the committee, kind of take it from there.
You didn't realize you were volunteering when you signed up for the panel.
I did not. Should have read the small print. But what do people think about that? If we, give a couple weeks for feedback, a couple weeks for volunteer. I don't want to let this go stale. We talked about this last year and nothing happened. So I think because, at least Gillian and I haven't chaired in a while, we have maybe a little more energy to keep it moving. So are folks cool with that? If you're not cool, feel free to, you can DM me on Twitter, We Librarian, or Gillian, or Merle. So, get in contact with us, and then we'll try to get something out to the community. We did kind of discuss the best way to do that. We don't have a listserv.
Slack is going to stay up for
Okay.
it. We've committed to keeping that channel open for at least a month, so that's kind of a bit of a private way rather than
Okay.
tweeting it to the world if you want to.
We do know that a lot of Code for Lib, a lot of our access people are on Code for Lib. I don't know if they'd mind if we use their listserv. We do tend to promote the conference in all of those places, Code for Lib, LIDA, all the things that are not our own, our provincial associations, etc. But if there's real interest in the listserv, you can also put that in the feedback. because we do want to make sure this is community-driven, and we do have the history of it coming from us, and I think we need to keep that. So, let us know your thoughts.
Okay, we're gonna, you got a quick comment, we're right at 11. Okay.
What about the idea of setting it up on GitHub so that documentation's all there, could be dumped in, you can, issues, comments, and all
Yeah.
that?
That's a good idea.
Great idea.
You volunteered for that, huh?
Excellent, lots of volunteers. Okay, we're going to call it there. It's coffee break time now. Coffee break in the lobby. We're back here at 11:15 for a very exciting keynote. So don't be late. Listen for the bell. Get back here on time.